Welcome to Pragnananda Ramesh Babu taking on the world number 3 Hikaru Nakamura. He opens up with 1d4, which Hikaru responds with d5 and knight f3 and knight f6 by Hikaru Nakamura, and c4 gambits by pragg, and c5 same thing by Hikaru, and c takes d5, and then also c takes d5 and queen takes d4 and queen takes d5, and then pragg attacks the queen with knight c3, which Hikaru takes the queen and knight takes, and then a6 by Hikaru, and g3 trying to get out the bishop on g2 by pragg, and then e5 kicking off the center knight, and knight jumps over to b3, and knight jumps over to c6, and bishop comes to g2, and then a5, knight comes over to b5, and bishop comes to b4 and gives a check, and as you can't fork the king and the rook by the way, and bishop blocks with in d2, and king comes over to e7. Now if you take the bishop, actually Hikaru can take it with the a pawn and open up the a file, so a3 by pragg, and bishop takes on d2 by Hikaru, and knight takes on d2 and a4 getting more space on the queen side. Knight jumps over to c4, and then bishop attacks the knight on e6, rook defends it, and Hikaru brings his rook to a6, because if you did not do that, pragg can bishop takes c6 and the e5 pawn hangs, so rook a6 and castles. Rook goes to d8, controlling the active d file by Hikaru, and knight comes to e3 by pragg, and then rook goes to a5 by Hikaru, and then bishop takes on c6 by Hikaru pragg, and b takes c6, and knight retreats itself to c3, and bishop infiltrates on b3, knight comes to b1, and rook goes to a6 and f4, and then e5, king comes to f2, rook goes to b6, and knight jumps over to c3 again, and then g6, and then rook comes to b1, and then knight comes over to the central square d5 by Hikaru, and then rook again protects, and then f5 by Hikaru Nakamura, g4, and then f takes on g4, knight takes on g4, and knight takes the f4 pawn, but now pragg forks the pawn and the knight, which Hikaru forces a knight trade with knight to d5 check. Now you can't actually take the knight with the knight, because after the bishop takes, black will be so strong and with the pawn structure and everything. So king takes on e4, and knight takes on c3 check, and b takes c3 by pragg, and then c5, and rook comes up to f4, bishop gives a check on d5, and king retreats itself to e3, and then h5 and c4 asking a trade of bishop and knight by pragg, which Hikaru just declines in by bringing his bishop to a8, and knight comes to h6, rook gives a check on e6, king comes back to f2, Hikaru forces a trade of rooks with rook to f6, and then pragg just comes king g3, which Hikaru traps the knight with rook to h8, and rook takes on f6 by pragg, and then king takes on h6, and rook comes to f1 and gives a check, which goes king to g7 and traps the knight. Now you can't actually come knight to f7 because after rook to f8 it's pinned and you can't even support it and you lose the knight anyway. But you lose it also for free, so pragg comes knight to f5 and then g takes f5 and rook takes f5 and rook goes to c8 and rook takes on h5. Now hikaru has a slight advantage, which pragg has 2 pawns for hikaru's bishop. And now bishop comes to b7, trying to attack the c4 pawn by bringing it to a6, which pragg comes king f4. But after bishop a6 you can't actually support it, which hikaru just goes bishop a6 and king comes over to e5 as you can't support it. But hikaru, this is also a fine move, king to g6 attacking the rook, and the rook just retreats itself to h4 and king again attacks. Now pragg comes rook h3 because you can't keep your rook on the same file, because if you come rook to e4 then rook to e8 wins the rook for free. So, and even rook to f4 won't work because again rook to e8 wins the rook. So pragg comes rook h3, leaving the c4 pawn unsupported, which hikaru takes, and rook gives a check and king retreats itself to h6 and then e4 by pragg, and rook goes to c6 by hikaru and king comes to f5 by pragg, and bishop goes to f7 and king goes to e5, and then hikaru pushes the pawn to c4 and king comes to d4 trying to win the c4 pawn, and rook gives a check on d6 and king comes to c5, and then rook offers a trade of rooks. But now if pragg answers it, then the d pawn will be a buzzer and it will promote into a queen. So king comes to b4, and then first hikaru gives a check on b3, and now pragg by mistake takes on a4, and after rook takes g3, now the c pawn cannot be stopped from promoting if you take the rook. So Praggnanandha Ramesh Babu is saying, what a game! Hikaru defeats Praggnanandha